So let me at this time invite Rona up to tell us about the Passover Seder.
Good morning. Good morning. So, let's see how far I get with visual aids. This might be not doing that. Hold on. Let's see. Okay. All right. So, Passover. Passover is an experiential holiday. At the Passover Seder, which is a home ritual based around a meal, guests not only have a chance to hear the story of the Exodus from Egypt, but through symbolic Passover foods and the discussions that they provoke, we get to experience slavery and liberation and empathize with people still yearning for freedom. The word Seder means order. In modern Hebrew, kol beseder means it's okay. What's up? Kol beseder, everything's in order. The Haggadah, which literally means telling or retelling, is the liturgy and the user guide for the Passover Seder. It was written over the course of 1,000 years, starting in the 2nd century, and finally, by the 12th century, it reached the form that we can probably all recognize, with 4 questions, with poems, with songs at the end. And it's still a work in progress, and so each of us adds our own story to the Seders that we attend. The template for the ritual meal is laid out in the 4 questions, which are questions traditionally asked by the youngest guest at the Seder. I was the youngest guest for 4 years until my cousin Michelle was born, and then she was the youngest guest. What is different about this night? Manishtana halayla hazeh. Why do we eat matzah? Why do we eat bitter herbs? Why do we dip food in salt water and in horosis? And finally, why do we recline around the table? The answer to these questions is that we, all of us, were slaves, and the Lord God redeemed us with a mighty hand. So, whether you hear that as being freed from ancient captivity thousands of years ago by a God who can make miracles, or if you hear that as you and me gaining freedom from our own personal captivity, with the help of a higher power or inner strength or the support of our friends, is up to you. But what we can all agree on is that there's a lot of liberation work left to do personally, together, and in society. So, now we get to the hard part, the visual aids. So, where does this need to be?
More in the center.
Okay, I'm gonna get steps in there. So, why on this night do we eat matzah? Matzah is unleavened bread. Matzah tells the story, starts the story of leaving in haste. The Hebrew slaves needed to flee immediately. We could not wait for the bread to rise. Just like we need to leave our bondage behind quickly. We need to rip off the bandage. So on the table is a stack of 3 matzot, which represent the Jewish people. During the Seder, the middle matzah is split in 2, and one half, the afikomen, I knew this was going to be too hard. Hold on. One half, the afikomen, is hidden, later to be found and redeemed. Maybe that would be better, but I have to hold this too. So here we go. I can try the handheld mic. That would be good. Okay. Afikomen, which is the name for this half matzah, as Greek for dessert. and we need it in order to finish the meal. It represents, perfect, that's so good. Great. Okay. The hidden afikomen symbolizes the captivity of the Jews in Egypt, in many lands afterwards, where Jews were a stateless people, in pogrom-ridden Europe, in ghettos around the world, during the Inquisition and the Holocaust. Later in the Seder, this is going to be redeemed. The ransom, which in my day was a silver dollar for each child, will be willingly paid. During the 1960s and until the fall of the Soviet Union, a fourth matzah was added to remember the plight of the Jews in the Soviet Union. Bitter herbs. Why bitter herbs? Bitter herbs leave the taste of suffering, the suffering of slavery, in our mouths. Salt water. I know, I could have done better on this. NaCl. Salt water. Salt water flavors even the tastiest of foods with the tears of slaves. The two foods that are dipped in salt water are parsley and an egg. The parsley symbolizes spring, of course, but also the offspring of the Hebrews in Egypt. One of the cruelest things that Pharaoh did was order the male Hebrew children to be drowned in the salt water of the Nile Delta. The egg? Spring, of course, but a rebirth that's salted with tears. So haroset. Haroset is pretty delicious. It's a mixture of fruit and nuts and wine and a little bitter herbs, but it symbolizes Pharaoh's cruel order to make adobe bricks without straw. If you didn't meet your quota of bricks for the day, you could be beaten, you could be whipped, you could be killed. If you remember the story of Moses leaving Egypt, he left after killing a guard who was beating a slave for not making enough bricks. And so it's very good. Okay. And of course, we recline. We recline in our seats because we're now free, or at least we now have the ability to act as if we're free. So not in the four questions are two inedible foods that remind guests of the sacrifices common in the days of the temple: a roasted lamb bone and a roasted egg. Passover is one of 3 agricultural sacrifice holidays when everyone, for example, Jesus and his followers, would head to the temple for sacrifices. Vegans can substitute a blood-red beet for the lamb and a baby eggplant for the egg. What sacrifices are we willing to make? So the Haggadah is an evolving document, and the Seder makes way for new concerns each year. For example, this year many people have added an empty chair to express the longing that Hamas release the remaining hostages or release their remains. And olives, which have been on the table for a number of years now, representing the fervent wish for peace in the Middle East, to an end to war and an end to the occupation in Palestine. Additions to the Seder plate can be items that remind guests of their own liberation stories. Okay. For the last 40 years, a crust of bread or an orange is found on many Seder plates. Susanna Heschel at Oberlin originated this tradition, saying that there was as much room for a lesbian in Judaism as for bread on the Seder plate. The bread is given way to an orange whose many segments represent the inclusion of women and LGBTQIA people. It's two-handed. Because the orange opens segments. Or not. Or not. coffee, chocolate, or a tomato remind guests that people, field workers, migrant workers, children. Oh,
Let me hold the mic while you do this.
okay, thank you, that's so much better. Continue to toil in the fields like we did when we were slaves, and that often it's their forced labor that puts food on our plates. This is a call to action. Airlifts of Ethiopian Jews to Israel saved their lives, but they were starving and in such bad shape that they could only tolerate eating mashed potatoes until they were strong enough for protein. The potato reminds us of their modern-day exodus. During the war in Iraq, cashews reminded us about troops far away in the desert, in a war not of their own choosing. The salty nuts reminded us of the desert and the danger. I think we can all remember the photos of 3-year-old Elon Kurdi and his 5-year-old brother Galip washing ashore in Europe, drowned. With their tragic deaths, the world woke up to the enormous but human scale of suffering for Syrian refugees. Their dad said they loved bananas, and every day that he could manage it, he would bring home a banana for the boys to share. A banana on the Seder plate not only honors little Elon and Galip, but it raises our awareness about refugees and displaced people around the globe today. Acorns find their way to some tables to remind guests that we're celebrating our liberation on land stolen from indigenous people. Toward the end of the Seder, a cup of wine is poured for Elijah, and the haunting tune, Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, is sung, and the door opened for the prophet, and all of the guests say in unison, "May all who are hungry come and eat." These actions represent our longing for a messianic era of world peace and an end to hunger. Also, the parents always drink the wine. It's like Santa's cookies. Now, along with Elijah's cup, we honor women with Miriam's cup. This cup, filled with water from each guest, recognizes the role women played in the Exodus and also the continuing responsibility that women around the world take to provide water for their communities. Watch this, the white thing's gonna show up on the orange. So cute, okay. So, happy holiday, Chag Sameach. May all beings be liberated, and may we all help make it so.